Psychological and spiritual chaos, psychological and spiritual clarity. How do we navigate the inevitable and often dangerous purgatory in between? I would appreciate your full attention on this question, because I truly believe that it is the central challenge of human life. We're talking immaturity to maturity at every level of our being as a human. How do we do it? It's a lifelong process, and in essence, it's not something which we can answer in a single video, but I do believe that there are time-tested strategies and tools to make this process a little easier and hopefully a lot quicker. We're going to begin to answer this question of how we can get psychological and spiritual maturity coupled together with a few wonderful extracts from A Treatise on White Magic by Alice Bailey, first published in 1934, and very appropriately, the final book which I'm holding up in Inner Work Essentials, this 52-episode series on full spectrum inner work. What I invite your attention to focus on in particular as I read these Alice Bailey quotes, straight from 1934, but very relevant for our life in the 21st century, is how Alice Bailey calls attention to our shadows and to our limited egoic identity constructs. She's not pulling any punches. She has no reason to hold back. I'm going to let her words do the talking and lead with a quote that talks about this moment where someone has gained a certain level of psychological and spiritual clarity, but they've still got a lot of chaos which is keeping them from that true integration and that feeling of being lost in the clouds and not grounded on the earth. So, quote from the book. Sometimes the disciple is walking in the sunlight and at other times in the dark. Sound familiar? Sometimes he knows the joy of full communion, and again all seems dull and sterile. His service is on occasion a fruitful and satisfying experience, and he seems to be able to really aid, and yet at other times he feels that he has naught to offer the world, and his service is arid and apparently without results. This is dated language. Of course, it's the same for a woman, but I'm going to stay with Bailey's language with he. All is clear to him some days, and he seems to stand on the mountain top looking out over a sunlit landscape. Where all is clear to his vision, he knows and feels himself to be a son of God. Later, however, the clouds seem to descend, and he is sure of nothing, and seems to know nothing. He walks in the sunlight and is almost overpowered by the brilliance and heat of the solar rays, and wonders how long this uneven experience and the violent alteration of these opposites is to go on. If that doesn't sound familiar to you, this video is probably not for you, because that describes the case of every single person who would define themselves, at least to some degree, as a spiritual seeker. High highs, low lows, manic depressive tendencies, elation, depression, apathy and ecstasy, all woven together in that oscillating shadow pendulum between the opposites. Bailey continues, that was the quote that introduces what happens when a single aspirant is going through the case, but what happens when we have a society of people who are lost in that space in between. It's very relevant. There's a reason that I'm reading this quote in full. So, next quote, this is what happens when it scales up to a collective sense. From page 618, a very densely highlighted and well worth reading book. Sensitive people everywhere are being swept into a vortex of spiritual desire, and ardently look and long for the life of liberation, of spiritual undertakings, and of soul consciousness. This is where we're getting into the more spiritual development side of things. Their recognition of their own latent possibilities is now so strong that they overestimate themselves. They give too much time to picturing themselves as the ideal mystic, or in deploring their lack of spiritual achievement or their failure to achieve a sphere of service. Thus they become lost. On the one hand, in the vague and misty realms of a beautiful idealism, of colorful hypotheses, and of delightful theories. Oh, I love this language. On the other hand, they become engulfed in a dramatization of themselves as the centers of power, in a field of fruitful service. She's really painting out the common spiritual grandiosities and spiritual bypassing here. Let me continue a few more sentences and then we'll start to unpack this and get towards the hopeful solution as we develop in that purgatory in between. Continuing the quote. They draw up mentally plans for world endeavors to see themselves as the pivotal point around which that service will move. They frequently make an effort to work out these plans and produce an organization which is potentially valuable, but equally potentially useless, even if not dangerous. Their work is founded on a subjective egotism which must and will be eliminated before true service can be rendered. If you're getting occult vibes from this book, then you're not off the mark. This is classic theosophy. This is second or third generation theosophy, just before the start of the Second World War, as things were getting chaotic in Europe in particular, writing out of London, Alice Bailey in the Theosophical Society. What she's trying to paint here is not something which is lost in the past. I would argue that this image, or this tapestry of energy that she's given to us, is more relevant now than ever. How long has it been that you've been in that personal stage of penduluming between unreliable opposites, between ecstasy and agony, a few weeks here, a few weeks there, a few days here, or maybe moment by moment, that feeling that you know you're going somewhere meaningful, but how do we navigate our power, and how do we refine our soul to hold that power without becoming delusional, distorted, or otherwise self-serving, or at worst, do none of that and just remain an immature fairy or play-pretend wizard who's essentially fucking around and not doing anything with the time that they've been gifted. This is the question of white magic. Ultimately, Alice Bailey, as her solution, as you can probably guess from the title, A Treatise on White Magic, is to take the path of the white magician. If I'm starting to lose you with occult and esoteric terminology, consider this just a thought experiment. You don't need to make any faith-based assumptions. You don't need to go into that theosophical or even New Age territory if you don't want to. You can still read a book like this and take it as an exercise in intuition. You can take it as a mental thought experiment about how you might possibly want to refine your faculties. Just an invitation. Alice Bailey's ultimate invitation, as I just said, got a beautiful quote, is to become a white magician. What does that mean? It means about 650 pages of densely written instructions. This book in particular is the 15 tenets of esoteric white magicianship, which is distinct from being a black magician or a black witch, basically meaning that you want to use your power for good. You want to try and use that power, you want to try and use that spiritual downpouring or that visionary state or that dream that you had when you knew you were going to do that thing for good. You want to serve the world and you want to show up as more light than dark. Of course, you have to do your shadow work and integrate the dark and realize that there are parts of you which do express evil tendencies, not that you are evil, but certain evil tendencies and shadow behaviors nonetheless. This is the path of the white magician. This will be the final quote from the book. I actually had a very difficult time trying to go through exactly which quotes I would bring through in this book, but I'm going to read through a few different indications to what being a white magician might mean, because I think it has a lot of practical value, especially for this question of refining our soul and getting to that end game with the inner work, which, well, that's what we're aiming towards, right? Quotes from the book. What is the white magician? Well, the white magician is one who is in touch with their soul. They are receptive to and aware of the purpose and plan of their soul. Nothing new. This is Spiritual Psychology 101. This is like first year of, you've just read The Power of Now and you're starting to get a bit mystical, you're starting to get a little bit hippie. Nothing new. You're in contact with your soul. Great. But how do we make that practical? Point number 3 of these 10 points, I'm not going to go through all of them, I'm going to pick and choose. They are capable of receiving impressions from the realm of spirit and of registering them in their physical brain. key distinction there. We've spoken about this idea in a few different episodes in the series. It's not just inflow, it's are you attuned to actually translate that information? For the sake of an analogy, if the information's coming in German and you only speak English, you're not going to get very close to the truth at all. Of course, language is not a human construct when it's turned to energy. It's the law of vibration, some would say. It's very New Age language, but ultimately it's an energetic frequency which we clothe in language. Neither here nor there. The point is, you got to use your brain. You got to have a logical faculty. Alice Bailey, throughout this book, makes a very strong, potentially savage at times case that it's the illiterate, uneducated man or woman who suffers the most on this purgatory in between, not because you have to read lots of books and be very smart in a bookish sense to get the most out of life, but if you're going to choose this path of having soul contact or having a contact with spirit, even above a soul level, there's a certain level of prerequisite education, a certain knowledge of the building blocks of certain occult, esoteric, or spiritual traditions, which is required to make sense. And this is the same as learning a language. It's why I highly recommend that you read books and self-educate. Psychoeducation is an unavoidable process on the path of being a white magician or a white witch. So, number 4, it's also stated that white magic works from above downwards. It's the result of solar vibration and therefore of egoic energy, and it is not an effect of the vibration of the form side of life being divorced from emotion and mental impulse. This is where you start to get a bit more of the occult vibe of this book. I'm not leaning too heavily into it. I realize that it will polarize viewers who don't want to make any New Age faith-based belief leaps, but you can read it for yourself if you're interested. I'm very much leaving a lot behind the veil for you to search for in your own time. But again, 52nd episode of the series. There's a reason why I'm finishing on this. I'll read out a few more quotes. The soul is in deep meditation. We know this. The physical incarnation. Fantastic. Communication between the soul and the instrument. Here we go. Key point. This is one that we'll focus in on. When the communication between the soul and its instrument, meaning the identity, the egoic identity, or even the physical body, there's some complexity there, but the soul and you are the soul, but you aren't. Difficulty of language, get what I'm saying. Between the soul and its instrument is conscious and steady, the person becomes a white magician. Therefore, workers in white magic are invariably, and through the very nature of things, advanced human beings, for it takes many cycles of lives to train a magician. And then we go into a bit of Hindu-inspired theosophy. I'll put the book down. We're about 12-13 minutes into the video, and I haven't really given too much practical advice. We've painted the picture. We've woven that tapestry at least to some degree of clarity, but I don't know how useful all of this information is in the actual walking of that path between immaturity and maturity. Number one indication that screams out for me from this whole book and the 12 or 13 Alice Bailey books that I've read is that you have to do the trauma work and you have to clear out your instrument. It's the analogy that I've given before of cleaning out the pipe with the gunk inside of it, or polishing yourself with the vase which initially is covered in soot or ash, and as you polish away, you realize that you're actually this beautiful reflective surface which has beauty beneath the darkness and the trauma. This is the beginning step, and it's the beginning step which is the initial step where everything else is built upon. The journey doesn't really begin if you stay in the spiritually grandiose, spiritually excited stage where you just get more and more inflated, more and more self-obsessed, and your self-love becomes something which has no intention of externalizing. If you want to know my answer in a few sentences to what it takes to refine the soul, it's having enough self-love, which I define as self-compassion, and self-respect, the feminine and masculine principles by my own, hopefully original conception. I might have stolen it from somewhere, but compassion and respect wedded together, unconditional positive regard, all blended as a state and a series of actions. Simple language. If you love yourself, and you get to a point where you love yourself genuinely enough as an egoic identity, as all the parts inside of you, and as the soul which you are and also are in contact with, and then higher spirit as well. You take that all to encompass yourself very naturally, and hopefully very naturally, but very naturally in my experience, you start to give back. The refinement of the soul is in love directed inwards and outwards. The reason that I've made a 52 episode series for free on YouTube, which has taken me 7 months to produce and 3 years to study for, is that my self-love and my feeling of self-respect externalizes as a desire to give more support to those who want to do exactly the same. It's that unavoidable impulse. It's that feeling that I had years and years ago, even though I didn't have the prerequisite skills or knowledge or verbal ability, and I hadn't done the trauma work, let's say maybe 5 years ago. That's the impulse of the soul via direct experience. It's connected, it's interwoven, it seeks to make contact not only with you but with others. We can get lost into the land of fairies when we start talking about soul tribe, when we start talking about soulmates and all of the new age concepts, but at its very basic, as it's always been for human history, thousands of years of recorded instances across the many cultures of the world, the healthy human and the mature human is someone who cares about themselves and cares about the environment around them and tries to engage with both in a meaningful and consistently genuine sense. It's about authentic personality, authentic spirituality, and finding a way to translate that into the world. For this video, I will really just dive deeper into that one point. If you don't have a field of service which is defined, or you're at that stage that Alice Bailey mentioned, when you've defined your field of service, let's say you're an artist, you've defined your artistry, but you're not committing to the devoted, everyday, disciplined practice of being the artist, knowing that you have an aesthetic view of the world which would give back so much joy and meaning to those who view your creations, you're not honoring your soul. You're definitely not refining your soul, and at worst, you are betraying your soul. It's strong language. Some people would say that we can never betray our soul, that everything happens for a reason, and that we're always doing the best that we can. Yes, and you're also fucking around. You can hold both paradoxes together. It's worth doing the work, the trauma work, the inner work, the parts work, the shadow work, everything that I've mentioned in this series, but if you don't have a genuine intention to do something in the world, what are you doing here with your years? That's the energy. Really strong energy. Hopefully it wasn't too triggering and too direct, but at the same time, like, come on. That's the refinement. It's not going into the cave. It's not running away. It's staying in the world. It's been quite the process over the last 7 months, me putting together these videos. I managed to do 4 months of uploading twice per week, and then my structure went a little bit and I got once a week, but now here I am, and I've proven to myself, at least to some degree, that I am devoted to this work, and I do have that genuine excitement in seeing every video. So blessed to receive this. People commenting down below and me responding to every comment to the best of my ability. People going and reading the books I've held up. Holding up a book like this right now and saying, A Treatise on White Magic by Alice Bailey, top esoteric book in my library, please buy it, knowing that maybe you and potentially dozens, if not hundreds of people in the years to come will encounter this book and do the work for themselves because I put in the effort to make those ripples in the world. It is truly exciting and truly inspiring for me to see that role as a central nexus which draws inspiration from above, grounds yourself onto the earth below, and makes ripples, like beautiful waves of healing, beautiful waves of artistry and health and power. And progressively, that's how we heal a society which is very sick and very disconnected and very fragmented. It's been an absolute pleasure to produce this series. It's a moment of relief that I got to the end. I've definitely outgrown the feeling of wanting to hold up a book every single episode and go through the same structure. I'm likewise very much on my own individuation path, and I want to take it to that next level. I'm happy with what I've achieved here. part of me would say I wish I could have achieved more, but how much can you really send out into the world in a few free videos? That's not for me to decide. All I can decide is my own effort, my own intention, and am I going to show up with the daily work to try and meet that intention? For me, doing this series has been at least a little part of what it means for me to refine my soul and enter into that field of service where I try and do something meaningful with my life. But of course, it's not the end. Obviously not the end. In fact, if you thought 52 episodes was quite the commitment, well, next series is being launched next week, and it's a wonderful question and answer, back to basics, responding to everyone who has inner work questions. And that's what I'm going to do. It's going to be one of two series. I'll talk more about the next series in the future. But essentially, I am here to help. I'm here to answer questions. And if you have a question for me, please, maximum 2 sentences, anything to do with inner work, put it in the comments, and I'm going to start choosing questions to respond to for many years to come. Series link over here, Inner Work Library Sessions, question and answer. It has been an absolute pleasure to do Inner Work Essentials, and hopefully I'll see you over there with the next series.